The early morning sun cast long shadows across Atlanta International Airport as Sarah Mitchell wheeled her designer carry-on through the bustling terminal. At 35, she had grown accustomed to the weight of her laptop bag across her shoulder and the familiar click of her heels against the polished floor. Today was like any other Tuesday, except for the major client presentation waiting for her in Los Angeles. Sarah had built her career from the ground up, transforming herself from a small-town girl in Georgia to one of Atlanta's most respected corporate attorneys. Her charcoal gray pantsuit and pearl earrings were as much a part of her professional armor as her encyclopedic knowledge of contract law. These days, she could afford the finer things in life, including her regular first-class flights to meet with clients across the country. As she approached the priority check-in counter, Sarah noticed the subtle shift in the attendant's expression, a fleeting look she had seen countless times before. The attendant's smile remained fixed, but her eyes told a different story. Sarah handed over her ID and platinum frequent flyer card with practiced ease. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice carrying the warmth and confidence that had become her trademark in the courtroom. "I have a first-class ticket to Los Angeles on Flight 2876. The attendant's fingers moved across the keyboard with mechanical precision. "I'll need to verify your frequent flyer status," she said, despite the platinum card sitting right in front of her. Sarah maintained her composure, having learned long ago that reactions only reinforced prejudices. "Of course," she replied, pulling out her phone to show her digital membership profile. The attendant scrutinized the screen longer than necessary before finally printing Sarah's boarding pass. Making her way through security, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on how these microaggressions had shaped her approach to success. Each challenge had only strengthened her resolve to excel, to prove that excellence knew no color. Her mind wandered to her upcoming presentation, a potential multi-million-dollar deal that could cement her position for partnership at the firm. The first-class lounge welcomed her with its familiar leather seats and complimentary breakfast spread. Sarah settled into her usual routine, reviewing her presentation notes while sipping her morning coffee. A few other business travelers occupied the space, most absorbed in their phones or laptops. She noticed a few curious glances but paid them no mind. When the priority boarding call came, Sarah gathered her belongings with practiced efficiency. She had learned to travel light but smart. Everything she needed for a 3-day business trip fit perfectly in her carry-on. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass, and again, there was that pause, that double take that spoke volumes. Walking down the jet bridge, Sarah straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, not out of defiance, but from the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she had achieved. The plane's entrance welcomed her with the familiar scent of fresh upholstery and coffee. The first flight attendant greeted her warmly enough, but the second one's eyes narrowed as Sarah turned left toward first class instead of right toward economy. Sarah could feel the weight of their stares as she located her seat. 2A, by the window, her preferred spot. As she stored her carry-on in the overhead compartment, Sarah caught snippets of whispered conversation between two flight attendants. Their furtive glances in her direction told her everything she needed to know about their topic of discussion. She had seen this scene play out before, but experience had taught her that how she handled the next few moments would set the tone for the entire flight. Sarah took her seat with grace, arranging her personal items with the efficiency of someone who flew weekly. She pulled out her phone to send a quick message to her assistant about the afternoon schedule in Los Angeles, all while aware of the growing attention from the cabin crew. The first-class cabin gradually filled with other passengers, mostly middle-aged businessmen in suits and a few older couples who had likely upgraded with miles. Sarah noticed how the same flight attendants who had eyed her suspiciously were now all smiles as they greeted other first-class passengers, offering them pre-flight beverages without question. She knew what was coming. It was like a script she had read too many times before. Sure enough, as the cabin door closed and final preparations for takeoff began, a flight attendant approached her seat with a look that Sarah had learned to recognize all too well. The real test of her character was about to begin, and as always, she was more than prepared for it. The flight attendant stood beside Sarah's seat, her practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Ma'am, I'll need to verify your boarding pass again," she said, her tone carrying an edge of authority that wasn't being used with other passengers. Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath before reaching into her blazer pocket. This wasn't the first time she had been singled out, and she doubted it would be the last. As she handed over her boarding pass, she noticed another flight attendant hovering nearby, watching the interaction with poorly concealed interest. "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked calmly, though she knew exactly what the problem was. The flight attendant studied the boarding pass as if it were written in hieroglyphics, turning it over several times. "We just need to ensure everyone is in their assigned seats," the attendant replied, her words coming out too quickly. "It's standard procedure." A businessman across the aisle looked up from his newspaper, his eyebrows furrowed. He had boarded right after Sarah, but his credentials hadn't warranted a second check. The elderly couple in front of Sarah turned in their seats, not even trying to hide their interest in the unfolding scene. "Standard procedure?" Sarah echoed, her voice level but firm. "I fly this route every other week, and I've never seen you verify other first-class passengers' boarding passes after they're seated." The second flight attendant stepped forward now, her name tag reading Barbara. "We just want to ensure there hasn't been any confusion," she said, emphasizing the word confusion, as if Sarah might have accidentally wandered into first class like a lost child. Sarah sat up straighter, her years of courtroom experience evident in her posture. "I assure you," she said, reaching into her bag, "there's no confusion." She pulled out her platinum frequent flyer card, her business card from her prestigious law firm, and her driver's license, laying them out like exhibits in a trial. The first flight attendant's face flushed as she read Sarah's credentials. The business card from Anderson, Thompson, and Mitchell, one of Atlanta's top law firms, seemed to carry particular weight. Sarah could almost see the mental calculations happening behind their eyes as they realized their mistake. Other passengers had stopped pretending not to watch. A young man in a tech company hoodie was frowning disapprovingly at the flight attendants. The elderly woman in front of Sarah turned fully around in her seat. "I've been watching this whole thing," the elderly woman announced, her voice carrying through the cabin. "This is absolutely ridiculous. Would you be checking her seat assignment if she looked like me?" The flight attendant's discomfort was now clearly visible. Barbara shifted her weight from one foot to the other, while her colleague clutched the boarding pass like a shield. The cabin had grown uncomfortably quiet, with only the distant sound of the engines humming. "We apologize if there's been any misunderstanding," Barbara began, but Sarah raised her hand slightly, the same way she did in court when preparing to make a point. "Let me be clear," Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who argued cases for a living. "You verified my boarding pass 3 times now. Once at the gate, once when I boarded, and now again. I'm a platinum member who flies this route regularly for my law firm. I would appreciate you explaining why I'm receiving such special attention." The lead flight attendant, attracted by the growing tension in first class, approached the scene. He took in the situation quickly, the defensive postures of his crew, the displayed credentials, and the disapproving looks from other passengers. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes moving between Sarah and his staff. "Actually," Sarah replied, maintaining her professional demeanor, "I was just about to discuss the airline's non-discrimination policies and how they align with federal aviation regulations. Would you like to be part of that conversation?" The mention of policies and regulations had an immediate effect. The lead flight attendant's expression shifted from neutral to concerned, and Barbara took a small step backward. The original flight attendant finally lowered the boarding pass she'd been clutching. Sarah could feel the momentum shifting, just as it did in the courtroom when she knew she had presented an irrefutable argument. The next few moments would be crucial in determining how the situation would be resolved, and she was prepared to turn this incident into more than just another example of prejudice. She would make it a teaching moment. The lead flight attendant, whose Namatag grade Michael, quickly took control of the situation. His face showed the concern of someone who recognized a potentially serious problem developing. "Ladies," he said to his crew members, "I'll handle this from here." Sarah watched as the other flight attendants retreated, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and defensiveness. The cabin remained unusually quiet, with other passengers openly watching the scene unfold. The businessman across the aisle had completely abandoned his newspaper, and the elderly couple in front hadn't turned back around. "Ms. Mitchell," Michael began, lowering his voice professionally, "I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience or discomfort you've experienced. This is not the standard of service we aim to provide." Sarah maintained her composed demeanor, though she noticed her hands were slightly tense in her lap. Years of dealing with similar situations had taught her that this moment was crucial, not just for her, but for others who might face the same treatment. "I appreciate your apology, Michael," she replied, her voice clear enough for nearby passengers to hear. "But I think we need to address the underlying issue here. Would you agree that asking to verify a passenger's boarding pass 3 times is unusual?" Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, that would be unusual," he admitted. "And would you say it's standard procedure to subject only certain passengers to this level of scrutiny?" Sarah continued, using the same measured tone she employed when questioning witnesses. Before Michael could respond, the elderly woman in front turned around again. "I've been flying first class with my husband for 20 years, she declared. "Never once has anyone double-checked our seats after we boarded. Not once." Her husband nodded in agreement, adding, "It's plain as day what's happening here." The young man in the tech cubby had pulled out his phone and appeared to be typing something. "I'm logging a complaint on the airline's website right now," he announced. "This kind of profiling isn't acceptable." Sarah noticed a few other passengers nodding in agreement. The solidarity was touching, but she kept her focus on Michael, who was now visibly sweating. "Here's what concerns me," Sarah said, leaning forward slightly. "Your crew members made assumptions based on my appearance. They'd acted on those assumptions in a way that singles me out and creates a hostile environment. As someone who flies this route regularly for business, I need to know how the airline plans to address this." Michael ran a hand through his hair, clearly understanding the gravity of the situation. "Ms. Mitchell, you're absolutely right. This shouldn't have happened. I'd like to take down some information and file a formal report. Would you be willing to share more details about your experience today?" Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small notebook. "I've already noted the times, names, and specific interactions," she said. "I'd be happy to provide this information for your report. But more importantly, I'd like to discuss what steps will be taken to prevent this from happening to other passengers." The cabin had grown quieter still, with even the distant conversations from economy class seeming to fade away. Several passengers were now openly taking notes on their phones, perhaps documenting the incident themselves. "Of course," Michael replied, looking both professional and genuinely concerned. "Would you be willing to speak with our customer relations team once we land? They can properly address your concerns and discuss concrete actions moving forward." Sarah nodded, but added, "I would also like to see immediate action regarding crew training and awareness. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring every passenger is treated with respect and dignity." As Michael took notes and assured her that immediate action would be taken, Sarah noticed Barbara and the other flight attendant in the galley, having what appeared to be a serious conversation with another crew member. Their body language suggested they were being reprimanded. The elderly woman turned around one final time, reaching her hand over the seat. "I'm Patricia," she said warmly. "And I want you to know that how you're handling this is absolutely remarkable. You're turning this unfortunate incident into an opportunity for change." Sarah took Patricia's hand, feeling a surge of emotion at the unexpected support. The situation was far from over, but she had managed to transform what could have been an ugly confrontation into something potentially productive. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the atmosphere in first class remained charged with a mixture of tension and solidarity. Michael, the lead flight attendant, had just finished taking detailed notes about the incident and had moved to the front of the cabin for the safety demonstration. Sarah noticed that Barbara and the other flight attendant were now deliberately avoiding eye contact as they went about their pre-flight duties. Patricia, the elderly woman in front, had become something of an unofficial ally. She turned around yet again, this time with a business card in hand. "My husband Robert and I are on the board of several civil rights organizations," she whispered. "If you need any support in pursuing this matter further, please don't hesitate to reach out." Sarah accepted the card with a grateful smile, touched by the unexpected network of support forming around her. The tech company employee who had been documenting the incident leaned across the aisle. "I tweeted about what happened," he said quietly. "It's already getting attention. People need to know about this." The plane began its taxi to the runway, but the usual pre-flight atmosphere of passengers settling into their seats was replaced by hushed conversations about what they had witnessed. Sarah could hear fragments of discussions about similar incidents, corporate responsibility, and the need for change. As they waited for takeoff, A flight attendant Sarah hadn't seen before approached with a tablet in hand. "Miss Mitchell," she said softly, "I'm Jenny, the cabin service manager. I just received word from our ground team about the incident. The airline's executive customer relations team would like to speak with you when we land in Los Angeles." Sarah nodded, noting how quickly the situation had escalated up the corporate ladder. "Thank you, Jenny. I'll be happy to speak with them." The businessman across the aisle, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat. "I'm James Wilson, from Parker and Associates Law," he said. "I've seen similar cases before, and I must say, your handling of this situation has been exemplary. Would you mind if I shared your approach with our diversity and inclusion team?" Before Sarah could respond, the plane's engines roared to life, and they began their takeoff roll. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, Sarah noticed something remarkable. The very same flight attendants who had doubted her presence in first class were now being closely watched by their colleagues and passengers alike. Every interaction they had was under scrutiny. Once they reached cruising altitude, Michael returned with a fresh cup of coffee, Sarah's preferred drink, which she hadn't even had to request. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying genuine regret, "I've been reviewing our service protocols. Would you be willing to share your insights on how we could improve our training programs?" Sarah took a sip of her coffee, considering the request. This was an opportunity to create real change, to turn an unpleasant experience into something constructive. "I would be happy to provide input," she replied. "Perhaps we could start with understanding how unconscious bias affects customer service decisions." Patricia and Robert had turned around again, now fully invested in the conversation. "We could connect you with some excellent diversity trainers," Robert offered. "They've done wonders with several major corporations." The next hour of the flight transformed into an impromptu discussion about systemic change and corporate responsibility. Passengers from nearby seats contributed their own experiences and suggestions, while the flight crew listened attentively. Sarah found herself at the center of what had become a meaningful dialogue about transformation in the airline industry. Jenny returned with more news. "Our CEO has been informed of the situation," she said. "He would like to personally apologize and discuss how we can use this incident to improve our training programs company-wide." Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how quickly things had evolved. What had started as yet another instance of discrimination had transformed into an opportunity for institutional change. The very people who had doubted her presence were now witnessing the power and influence she wielded, not through anger or confrontation, but through dignity, professionalism, and the ability to transform conflict into progress. As the discussion continued, Sarah pulled out her laptop to begin documenting her suggestions for improved training protocols. She had learned long ago that real change required more than just acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It needed concrete actions and follow-through. This flight was turning into much more than a business trip to Los Angeles. It was becoming a catalyst for change. 2 hours into the flight, the dynamics in first class had shifted dramatically. The same cabin that had earlier been filled with tension now buzzed with purposeful energy. Sarah had opened her laptop and was methodically outlining recommendations for airline policy changes, while several passengers contributed valuable insights from their own professional experiences. Michael returned with a fresh round of drinks for everyone involved in the discussion. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, placing a sparkling water with lime on her tray table, "our regional director has just sent through an email. They're arranging for a conference room at LAX, where we can continue this conversation after landing." Sarah nodded, adding another point to her growing document. The businessman, James Wilson, peered over with professional interest. "You're approaching this exactly like a corporate restructuring," he observed. "Building from the ground up rather than just applying band-aid solutions." "Because that's exactly what it needs to be," Sarah replied, adjusting her reading glasses. "Surface-level changes don't address root causes. The airline needs to understand that this isn't just about sensitivity training. It's about transforming the entire corporate culture." Patricia and Robert had fully turned their seats around now, creating an informal meeting space. Patricia pulled out her own tablet, sharing statistics from similar incidents across various industries. "The patterns are remarkably consistent," she explained. "But so are the solutions, when properly implemented." The tech employee, who had introduced himself as Alex, was now showing Sarah the online response to his earlier posts. "Your story is resonating with thousands of people," he said. Many are sharing similar experiences, not just with airlines but across all service industries. Barbara, who had remained distant since the initial confrontation, approached the group with visible hesitation. "Ms. Mitchell," she said, her voice slightly shaky, "I would like to speak with you, if you're willing to hear me out." The cabin grew quiet as Sarah looked up from her laptop. This was a crucial moment, one that could either bridge divides or deepen them. She gestured to the empty seat beside her, inviting Barbara to sit. "I've been a flight attendant for 15 years, Barbara began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Today made me realize I've been carrying biases I didn't even recognize. Your response to our behavior. It's opened my eyes in ways that no training video ever has." Sarah set aside her laptop, giving Barbara her full attention. "Recognition is the first step toward change," she said kindly. "Would you be willing to share your perspective as part of the revised training program?" Barbara's eyes widened with surprise. "You want my input? After how I treated you?" "Sometimes the most powerful teaching tools come from acknowledging our mistakes and showing others how to do better," Sarah explained. "Your experience today, and your willingness to learn from it, could help prevent similar incidents in the future." The conversation expanded as other crew members, seeing Barbara's initiative, joined the discussion. Jenny brought out a sheet of paper where she had been noting specific procedural changes that could be implemented immediately. "We could start with a simple change," Jenny suggested. "Any secondary boarding pass verification should require supervisor approval and documented reasoning. It eliminates the possibility of arbitrary checks." Sarah typed this into her document, along with other practical suggestions that were emerging from the group discussion. The elderly couple contributed insights from their years of travel experience, while Alex added perspectives on how social media could be used to track and address similar incidents. The lead flight attendant, Michael, who had been taking his own notes, shared them with Sarah. "I've documented everything from our perspective," he said, "including our initial responses and what we've learned. It might be valuable for the training program." As the discussion continued, Sarah noticed something remarkable. The very incident that had started with discrimination had transformed into a collaborative effort to create meaningful change. The first-class cabin had become an impromptu think tank, with people from various backgrounds contributing to a solution. Looking around at the engaged faces, Sarah felt a sense of cautious optimism. This wasn't just about one incident or one airline. It was about creating a template for how similar situations could be handled across all service industries. The documentation on her laptop had grown into a comprehensive proposal for systemic change, built from the very experience she had just endured. As the flight entered its final hours, the collaborative atmosphere in first class had produced tangible results. Sarah's laptop screen displayed a detailed action plan, encompassing everything from immediate policy changes to long-term cultural transformation strategies. The document had evolved far beyond a simple complaint into a comprehensive blueprint for change. "Here's something we haven't addressed yet," Robert said, adjusting his reading glasses. "What about anonymous reporting systems for passengers who might not feel comfortable speaking up like Sarah did?" The suggestion prompted a new round of discussion, with Jenny quickly adding it to her growing list of implementable changes. Barbara, who had remained engaged in the conversation, shared her own revelation. "You know what I've realized," she said, looking around the cabin. "In 15 years of flying, this is the first time I've seen crew and passengers working together to solve a problem instead of just filing complaints against each other." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That's because we're approaching this as a shared responsibility," she explained. "Real change happens when everyone feels invested in the solution." The businessman, James Wilson, had been making calls during a brief break in the discussion. He turned to Sarah with an unexpected proposition. "My firm's diversity committee would be very interested in turning your approach into a case study. The way you've handled this situation could serve as a model for other corporations." Before Sarah could respond, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into Los Angeles. The announcement seemed to energize the group further, knowing their time together was limited. Michael approached with an update from the ground. "The airline's executive team has arranged for a private meeting room at LAX," he said. "They've also requested to include some of the passengers who witnessed everything, if you're willing to participate." He looked around at the group that had formed during the flight. Patricia immediately raised her hand. "Count us in," she said, speaking for herself and Robert. This is too important to walk away from now. Alex, still monitoring the online response to his earlier posts, shared some surprising news. The airline's social media team has already issued a preliminary statement acknowledging the incident and promising substantial changes. They're getting positive feedback for the quick response. The plane began its descent into Los Angeles. The work didn't stop. Sarah continued refining her document, incorporating last-minute suggestions and insights. The elderly couple shared contact information with other passengers who wanted to stay involved. Even some passengers from economy class, who had heard about the incident, sent forward notes with their own experiences and suggestions. Barbara, who had started the flight as an antagonist and transformed into an ally, approached Sarah one final time. "I've requested to be part of the team that develops the new training program," she said. "If you're willing, I'd like to share my perspective on how unconscious bias affected my actions today." Sarah reached out and squeezed Barbara's hand. "That's exactly the kind of honesty we need to create real change," she said warmly. As the plane descended through the clouds over Los Angeles, Jenny distributed her contact cards to everyone involved. "We've already scheduled a follow-up meeting for next week," she announced. The airline wants to fast-track these changes. The landing gear deployed with a familiar thud, and passengers began gathering their belongings. But unlike typical flights where everyone rushed to leave, the first-class cabin maintained its atmosphere of purposeful collaboration. Michael made one final announcement to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for turning what could have been a very negative situation into something constructive. Your participation today will help create positive changes for future passengers." As the plane touched down at LAX, Sarah looked at her laptop screen, now filled with detailed plans, suggestions, and commitments for change. What had started as another instance of discrimination had transformed into something unprecedented: a spontaneous collaboration between airline staff, passengers, and corporate professionals, all working together to address systemic issues. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but no one rushed to stand. Instead, phones came out as contact information was exchanged and final thoughts were shared. Sarah saved her document, knowing that the real work would begin once they left the plane. But looking around at the faces of those who had joined her in this unexpected journey, she felt confident that this time, real change was possible. The arrival at LAX marked not the end, but rather a new beginning. As passengers began to disembark, Sarah noticed a small group of airline executives waiting at the gate, their expressions a mixture of concern and professional interest. Among them stood a woman in a crisp navy suit who stepped forward as Sarah emerged from the jet bridge. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Amanda Reynolds, Chief of Customer Experience," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "We've arranged for a private meeting space to discuss today's events, and I understand we have several other passengers who'd like to participate." Patricia and Robert stepped forward, followed by James Wilson and Alex. Even Barbara and Michael had requested to stay after their shift ended. The impromptu coalition that had formed at 35,000 feet was holding strong on the ground. "Before we move to the meeting room," Amanda said, "our CEO would like to speak with you directly." She held up her tablet, where a video call was already waiting. The CEO's face appeared on screen, his expression grave. "Ms. Mitchell, I want to personally apologize for your experience today. But more importantly, I want to thank you for turning this incident into an opportunity for meaningful change." Sarah nodded, maintaining her professional demeanor. "I appreciate that, sir. I believe we've developed some concrete suggestions that could benefit your entire organization." The group was escorted to a well-appointed conference room near the airline's first-class lounge. As they settled in, Amanda's team distributed tablets containing Sarah's documented proposals, which she had shared during the flight. "What strikes me most," Amanda began, reviewing the materials, "is how comprehensive this is. You've addressed everything from immediate procedural changes to long-term cultural transformation." Sarah opened her laptop, bringing up additional notes. "That's because discrimination isn't solved with simple solutions," she explained. "It requires a multi-layered approach." Barbara, still in her flight attendant uniform, raised her hand. "If I may," she said, her voice stronger now, "I'd like to share how this experience has changed my perspective. It's one thing to sit through training videos, but it's another to see the direct impact of our biases." The airline executives leaned forward, paying close attention as Barbara recounted the incident from her perspective. Her honest self-reflection set the tone for what became a deeply productive discussion. James Wilson, the lawyer, contributed his expertise on corporate liability and best practices. What you have here, he explained, is an opportunity to become an industry leader in addressing these issues. Patricia and Robert shared insights from their years of civil rights work, while Alex presented data showing the social media response to the incident. The airline executives took copious notes, asking detailed questions and showing genuine engagement with the suggestions. "We'd like to implement these changes immediately," Amanda announced, pulling up a calendar. "Would you be willing to serve as a consultant during the process, Ms. Mitchell?" Sarah considered the proposition. "On one condition," she replied. "I want this to be more than just another corporate diversity initiative. This needs to be about fundamental change in how the airline industry approaches these issues." The meeting continued for several hours, with action items being assigned and timelines established. What had started as a discriminatory incident was transforming into a catalyst for industry-wide change. As the meeting drew to a close, Amanda shared one final piece of news. "Our board has approved the creation of a passenger advocacy council," she announced. "We'd like all of you to be founding members." The group exchanged looks of surprise and satisfaction. Patricia reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, while Barbara wiped away a tear of relief and gratitude. "Sometimes," Sarah said, addressing the room, "it takes a moment of discomfort to create lasting change. What matters is how we respond to these moments." As they prepared to leave, Amanda handed Sarah an envelope. "We've upgraded your frequent flyer status to our highest tier," she explained. "But more importantly, we want you to know that your experience today will help ensure no other passenger faces similar discrimination." The group began to disperse, exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch about the initiatives they discussed. As Sarah gathered her belongings, she caught Barbara's eye across the room. The flight attendant mouthed a silent thank you, and Sarah responded with a warm smile, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of understanding. 1 month after the flight that changed everything, Sarah sat in her Atlanta office reviewing the latest progress report from the airline. The impact of that day had rippled far beyond what anyone could have expected. On her desk lay a glossy brochure, the airline's new comprehensive training program, developed with input from everyone involved in the incident. Barbara's testimony served as a powerful opening case study, while Patricia and Robert's civil rights expertise had shaped the core curriculum. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Alex. The social media campaign he had started had evolved into a full-scale movement, with passengers sharing their own experiences and celebrating positive changes in airline service. His initial post about Sarah's experience had reached millions, prompting other companies to examine their own practices. "Ms. Mitchell," her assistant called from the doorway, "the airline's quarterly review committee is ready for your video call." Sarah logged into the conference, seeing familiar faces on her screen. Amanda Reynolds was there, along with several airline executives. Barbara, now promoted to lead trainer for the new program, sat confidently among them. The transformation in her demeanor over the past month was remarkable. "The numbers are exceeding our expectations," Amanda reported, sharing her screen. Customer satisfaction scores are up 27%, and reported incidents of bias are down significantly. Other airlines are reaching out to learn from our model. James Wilson's law firm had helped draft new industry-wide guidelines, which were now being implemented across multiple carriers. His email that morning had shared news of 3 other major airlines adopting similar reforms. But the real success, Barbara added, is in the changing attitudes we're seeing among our staff. People are more aware, more considerate, and more willing to examine their own biases. The Passenger Advocacy Council, which met monthly, had expanded to include representatives from diverse backgrounds and experiences. Patricia and Robert's connections in the civil rights community had helped establish partnerships with organizations across the country. As the meeting concluded, Sarah received another notification, a message from a young black woman who had recently flown first class for the first time. "I was treated with respect and dignity," the message read. "I know it's because of the changes you helped create. Thank you." Looking out her office window at the Atlanta skyline, Sarah reflected on how one difficult moment had sparked such significant change. The airline had not only followed through on their promises, but had exceeded expectations, setting new standards for the industry. The original incident had been featured in several business journals, analyzing how a potential PR disaster had been transformed into a model for corporate responsibility and change management. Sarah had been invited to speak at several industry conferences, sharing the story and its lessons. Her phone rang again. This time it was Michael, the lead flight attendant from that day. "You'll never believe what happened," he said excitedly. "We just finished training the 100th group of flight attendants under the new program. The feedback is incredible." Sarah smiled, remembering how that tense situation had evolved into something so positive. The airline had not only changed its policies, but had created a new culture of awareness and respect that was spreading throughout the industry. A calendar reminder popped up on her screen. The next day, she would be flying to Los Angeles again. But this time, she was going as a keynote speaker at an airline industry conference, sharing the story of transformation and change. Barbara had asked to introduce her at the conference, a symbolic gesture showing how far they had come from that initial confrontation. The elderly couple, Patricia and Robert, would be there too, representing the Passenger Advocacy Council they had helped establish. As Sarah packed up her office for the day, she picked up the framed article on her wall, a piece from a major business magazine titled "How One Flight Changed an Industry." The story had become a case study in effective corporate change, taught in business schools and management training programs. Her last email of the day was from the airline CEO, sharing news that their new training program had won an industry award for excellence in corporate responsibility. "None of this would have been possible without you," the message read. "You showed us that real change comes not from avoiding difficult moments, but from facing them with grace and wisdom." Sarah closed her laptop, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But the legacy of that flight continued to grow, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes come from turning moments of discrimination into catalysts for transformation.